Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. That's what happened to me the day my daughter walked out of our home, leaving behind her 6 children, and told me they were mine now. I didn't know then that this moment would test every ounce of faith I had left, and how all this happened. Let's start from the beginning. Before continuing, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching this story from, because what I'm about to tell you is still unbelievable. The sound of the door slamming behind her still echoes in my mind. Margaret Cole, 70 years old, stood frozen on the worn wooden floor as her daughter Emily stepped into the waiting taxi. "Mom, I can't do this anymore," Emily said without looking back. "I need my life back." The taxi pulled away, and with it, Margaret's last bit of peace. Behind her, 6 small faces stared in silence. 10-year-old Noah tried to comfort his youngest sister, Ava, only 2 years old, as she whimpered. "Grandma," whispered 8-year-old Lila, clutching her doll. "Where's Mommy going?" Margaret swallowed hard. The words wouldn't come. All she could do was stare at the letter on the table, Emily's farewell note, and the small envelope beside it containing $50. That was all they had. $50 and 7 hearts trying to survive. Margaret took a slow breath and knelt down, gathering the children close. "Come here, my loves," she said softly. "We'll be okay. I promise." Her arms were thin, but her embrace was wide enough for all 6 of them. Love, she thought, might not fill stomachs, but it fills souls, and that would have to be enough for now. "Grandma," Noah asked quietly, "are they going to take us away?" Margaret saw the fear in his eyes, the same warm brown eyes as his late father Daniel, who had died in an accident just before Ava's birth. She took his hand. "No, my boy. Nobody is going to separate us. Do you hear me?" "Promise?" asked 6-year-old Charlotte, her voice trembling. Margaret crossed her chest. "I swear on Almighty God, on my life and on your father's soul in heaven, we will stay together." Noah nodded. "Then I'll help you, Grandma. I'll take care of them." She smiled faintly. "You're just a child." "Then I'll be a man," he whispered. That night, Margaret made dinner from scraps, watery soup, a few beans, and old bread. The children ate in silence, glancing at the door, hoping their mother would walk back in, but the door never opened again. When everyone was asleep, Margaret sat in the dim light of the kitchen, her eyes on the crumpled letter. "I'm looking for a better life," Emily had written. Margaret wiped a tear. "Better for who, sweetheart? Because you left them behind." She heard a soft sound and turned. Noah stood there, holding baby Ava in his arms. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "You neither?" She shook her head and motioned him closer. "Grandma," Noah said, his voice steady. "I'll help you. I promise." Margaret put her hand on his cheek. "You already are, my boy." Then she whispered, half to herself, "I don't know how we'll make it, but we will. Viewers, be honest. What would you do if you were in Margaret's place? Could you start all over again at 70, raising 6 children alone?" Margaret kissed Noah's forehead, tucked him and Ava into bed, and whispered the old prayer her grandmother had once taught her. "Angel of God, my guardian dear." Her voice cracked on the last line, but she finished through her tears. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside that tiny home, 7 souls clung to one another, frightened but not broken. That night, a new story began, a story of love stronger than blood, and faith tested beyond measure. Don't miss the next part, when Margaret faces her first morning as a mother of 6, with only $50, trembling hands, and no idea how to feed them all. The night felt endless, but morning came anyway. Margaret hadn't slept a single minute. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emily's face, the slam of that door, the sound of the taxi fading into the dark. But the sun doesn't wait for heartbreak. It forces you to move. And for Margaret, this would be the first morning of her new life. one she never asked for, but could no longer escape. The grey light crept through the thin curtains, painting her small kitchen in shades of exhaustion. Her bones ached as she stood, her body reminding her she was 70 years old. Yet, as soon as she heard the faint sound of little feet shuffling on the floorboards, she straightened up. "Good morning, Grandma," said Noah, already dressed in his too small school uniform, the knees of his pants worn thin. "Good morning, sweetheart." She smiled, trying to sound cheerful. "Did you wake the others?" "Lila's helping Charlotte get dressed," he said. "Ava's still sleeping." Margaret stirred the pot of watery oatmeal, her last handful of oats, and a pinch of brown sugar. There was no milk. She'd have to buy some later, but that meant spending money she didn't have. One by one, the children came to the table. Sleepy, messy-haired, quiet. 8-year-old Lila held Ava's hand. Charlotte rubbed her eyes. The twins, Caleb and Liam, bickered over a toy car, their small voices echoing through the tiny kitchen. Margaret served the oatmeal into chipped bowls, forcing a smile. "Eat up, loves." They ate in silence, spoons clinking softly. Then Liam, only 4, looked up and asked the question that stabbed through Margaret's heart like a knife. "Grandma, is Mommy coming back today?" Margaret froze, her hand gripping the edge of the table. She could have lied. It would have been easy. But children deserve truth, gentle but real. "No, my love," she whispered. "Your Mommy needs some time." "How much time?" Caleb asked. Margaret had no answer, only silence. After breakfast came the daily chaos, finding missing shoes, brushing hair, wiping faces. Margaret's knees screamed with every step, her back stiff as she helped them one by one. It was a battle just to get 6 little bodies ready for school. By the time they stepped outside, the neighborhood was already alive. Car horns, the smell of frying dough from a street vendor, music from open windows. Margaret walked with Noah, Lila, Charlotte, and the twins, while carrying Ava on her hip. Every block felt like a mile, every breath a test of strength. "Grandma," Lila said, slipping her tiny hand into Margaret's. "We're going to be okay, right?" Margaret squeezed her hand. "Yes, my darling, we're going to be okay." But as she said it, she felt the familiar ache of doubt deep in her chest. How? At the school gate, she kissed each child goodbye. "Be good, study hard. I'll be right here when you finish." As they disappeared into the crowd, she felt both relief and fear. Relief that they were safe, for now. Fear of what would happen next. Carrying Ava back home, she stopped in front of the small grocery store. She needed food, milk, bread, maybe some fruit. But when she opened her purse and saw only $50, reality hit her like a punch. $50 to feed 7 people for 2 weeks. Her vision blurred. She leaned against the wall, clutching Ava close. For the first time since Emily left, she felt the full weight of despair pressing down on her. Then a gentle voice broke through the noise. "Mrs. Cole, are you all right?" She turned. It was Mr. Harrison, her 78-year-old neighbor. Thin, kind-eyed, always polite. He'd lived alone for years since his wife passed. Margaret tried to smile but failed miserably. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice cracked. He looked at the sleeping baby in her arms, then at her trembling hands. "I heard about your daughter," he said softly. "That's unthinkable. How are you managing?" "I don't know," she whispered. "I really don't know." Mr. Harrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "You'll find a way, Margaret. You always do." She laughed without humor. "I'm 70. I can barely keep myself standing." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll just have to be the strongest 70-year-old in the city." Viewers, do you think Margaret should have accepted help from others? Or should she fight alone to keep her dignity? What would you do? Mr. Harrison looked at her kindly. "Let me help just a little." "Come on, I'm buying groceries today." Margaret hesitated. Her pride wanted to refuse, but her love for those children was louder. "Thank you," she whispered, tears blurring her sight. As they walked into the store together, she made a silent promise to herself and to God. She would not fail those children. No matter how hard it got, don't miss the next part. When a stranger's knock on the door threatens to take away everything Margaret has fought to keep. There are moments in life when you think things can't possibly get worse, and then life proves you wrong. For Margaret, that moment came 3 weeks after her daughter's abandonment, when a knock on her door threatened to destroy the fragile peace she had built. But the story of that day didn't start with fear. It started with hope and hard work, and how that hope was tested. Let's start from the beginning. The days had begun to fall into a routine. Margaret would wake up before dawn, prepare breakfast burritos to sell on the corner, and walk the children to school. Then she'd spend the rest of the day sewing clothes on her old Singer machine until her hands bled. The money wasn't much, but it was something. Enough to buy food, enough to keep them together. Mr. Harrison often came by, carrying groceries or simply checking in. He'd become more than a neighbor. He was a quiet guardian angel who never asked for anything in return. "You're doing miracles with so little," he said one morning, watching Margaret thread a needle. She smiled faintly. "It's not a miracle, it's love. That's the only thing keeping us going." The children had begun to settle, too. Noah took charge of helping his younger siblings with homework, while Lila learned to calm baby Ava when she cried. Life wasn't easy, but at least it had rhythm. Until that afternoon. There was a knock at the door. When Margaret opened it, she found a woman standing there, clipboard in hand, and a badge pinned to her jacket. "Mrs. Cole?" "Yes," Margaret answered cautiously. "I'm Miss Rodriguez from Child Protective Services. May I come in?" For a second, Margaret couldn't breathe. CPS, those 3 letters had haunted her dreams since Emily left. Her heart pounded as she stepped aside to let the woman in. Miss Rodriguez looked around the small house, taking notes. The cracked paint, the second-hand furniture, the clothes drying on a string. The woman's eyes were calm but assessing. Margaret could feel the judgment in every silent glance. "What's this about?" she asked quietly. "We received a report," Miss Rodriguez replied. 6 minors living here without their parents present. I need to verify their living conditions." Margaret's stomach twisted. Someone had reported them. Probably a neighbor, meaning well, or meaning harm. The children froze at the table, eyes wide. Lila clung to Charlotte's hand. Noah stood up, shoulders squared like a tiny soldier. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "my grandma takes care of us. She feeds us every day. We go to school. She loves us." Miss Rodriguez blinked, surprised by his confidence. "And your mother?" she asked. "She left," Noah said. "But we don't need her. We have Grandma." Margaret felt tears burn her eyes. "Please," she whispered, "don't separate us. They are all I have. I'll find a way. I promise." Miss Rodriguez sighed, closing her clipboard. "Mrs. Cole, your dedication is clear. But love isn't always enough. These children need food, clothing, and medical care." Margaret straightened her aching back. "I'll work day and night if I have to. I can still do it." "You're 70 years old," Miss Rodriguez said gently. "I can still love," Margaret replied, her voice trembling but strong. "And I can still fight for them." The room fell silent. Even Miss Rodriguez seemed moved. Finally, she said, "I'll give you 3 months. Improve the conditions. Better food, stable income, proof the children are cared for. If not..." Her words trailed off, but the message was clear. 3 months, Margaret repeated. "Thank you." After the door closed, she sank into a chair, her body shaking. The children ran to her, hugging her tightly. "Are they going to take us away, Grandma?" Charlotte cried. Margaret pulled them all close, tears running down her face. "No, my loves," she whispered fiercely. "Nobody's going to take you. I promise on Almighty God." That night, long after the children were asleep, Margaret knelt before her small altar and prayed. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "I need a miracle. Not for me, for them. Viewers, tell me, have you ever faced something that made you feel completely powerless, yet you refused to give up? As she prayed, the soft light from the kitchen window glowed across the wall of the neighboring house. Inside, Mr. Harrison stood by his window, looking at the faint silhouette of Margaret praying. He thought of his dusty guitar sitting in the closet, unused since his wife died 10 years ago. And right then, a small spark lit in his heart. Maybe he could help in a way no one expected. Don't miss the next part, when Margaret reaches her lowest point, and an unexpected friend discovers a way to change everything. There comes a night in every struggle when faith feels like it's slipping through your fingers. When you whisper to yourself, "I can't do this anymore." For Margaret, that night came after the visit from Child Protective Services. Her body was breaking, her hope fading, and her heart, though still beating, was starting to believe she'd already failed. But how she found strength again. Let's start from the beginning. The 3-month deadline from Miss Rodriguez hung over Margaret like a storm cloud that refused to move. Each morning she woke before dawn, forcing herself to get up even when her bones screamed in protest. She made breakfast burritos to sell, sewed clothes until her fingers blistered, and prayed she could stretch every dollar just a little further. Some days she skipped meals so the children could have seconds. Other days, she sold old keepsakes, her wedding ring, her late husband's watch, even the small gold locket her mother had given her on her 15th birthday. Each sale felt like losing a piece of her soul. But as long as the children were fed, that was all that mattered. Weeks passed like that. Long, heavy days that blurred into one another. Until one scorching afternoon at the local market, Margaret's body simply gave up. She had been on her feet since sunrise, the sun beating down like a punishment. "How much for the dress?" a customer asked. Margaret opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. The world began to spin. Her vision faded, and then nothing. When she woke, she was lying in her bed. Her head throbbed, and her chest ached with every breath. A gentle voice broke through the fog. "Stay still, Mrs. Cole." It was Dr. Emily Carter, the community health worker, a kind woman with warm eyes and steady hands. "What happened?" Margaret croaked. "You collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration," Dr. Carter said. "Your blood pressure is dangerously high." "If you keep this up, you could die." Margaret tried to sit up, panic in her eyes. "The children, where are they?" "They're fine," the doctor assured her. "Mr. Harrison picked them up from school." "They're eating in the kitchen." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "I can't rest. I have work to do. If I stop, we'll lose everything." The doctor shook her head. "If you don't rest, you'll lose your life. And then they'll lose you. Is that what you want?" Margaret stared at the ceiling, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "I don't know what else to do," she whispered. "I've tried everything." Before Dr. Carter could answer, a familiar voice came from the doorway. "No, you haven't tried everything yet." It was Mr. Harrison, tall, frail, but with a spark in his eyes Margaret hadn't seen in years. Behind him, the children stood in the hall, holding each other's hands. "You're not alone, Margaret," he said softly. "You have neighbors. You have us. You have a community that cares." She tried to argue, but he shook his head. "You don't have to do this by yourself anymore." Little Lila spoke up, her voice trembling. "Please, Grandma, don't leave like Mommy did." Those words pierced Margaret's heart like a blade. She reached out her arms and the children ran into them, clinging to her as if she were their entire world. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "Not now. Not ever." Viewers, tell me honestly, have you ever kept going for the sake of someone you love, even when your own strength was gone? That night, after the doctor left with strict orders for rest, Mr. Harrison stayed behind. Margaret found him sitting quietly by the window. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing at the guitar leaning against the wall. "Maybe it's time to bring back an old friend." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I used to teach music," he said, eyes lighting up. "And these children, they need something more than survival. They need beauty. They need hope. Let me teach them." "For free?" Margaret stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" He smiled sadly. "Because my house has been quiet for 10 years, and maybe God just gave me a reason to hear music again." Slurs filled Margaret's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. In that moment, she didn't feel alone anymore. Don't miss the next part, when the sound of a single guitar string begins to change the lives of 6 children and their grandmother forever. Sometimes hope doesn't arrive with a grand miracle. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding an old guitar and a promise. That's how light found its way back into our house, and how that music changed everything. Let's start from the beginning. A week after Margaret's collapse, the home was different, softer somehow. The doctor's warning had shaken her. But it was Mr. Harrison's idea that started to heal her spirit. Every evening after school, he came by with his worn-out guitar and a patient smile. The children would gather on the floor, wide-eyed and curious. "Music," he said, strumming the first note, "is what saved me after my wife passed away. It doesn't just fill silence. It fills the heart." Noah sat closest, his elbows on his knees. Ava, barely 2, clapped at every sound. Even shy little Charlotte began to hum after the second lesson. Margaret sat by the window watching them. For the first time in weeks, laughter echoed through the walls. Laughter that sounded like home. Her heart swelled with both joy and guilt. "Maybe I've done something right after all," she thought. Mr. Harrison taught them simple songs. Hymns, lullabies, old folk tunes from his youth. Noah picked up the rhythm quickly, while Lila started singing with a soft, angelic voice. When she sang, everyone fell silent. One evening, as her voice filled the room, Margaret felt tears slide down her cheeks. It was as if the darkness that had covered her heart for so long was finally lifting. When the song ended, Noah looked at her. "Grandma, why are you crying?" She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Because, my love, sometimes even joy makes you cry." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Mr. Harrison packed his guitar and said quietly, "You've built something special here, Margaret. Don't let anyone take it away." She nodded. "I'll try." "No," he said gently. "You'll do. You've already come too far to stop now." Those words stayed with her. But as the days passed, new problems began to appear. The bills were piling up. The landlord had left a notice on the door. Overdue rent, final warning. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, staring at it in silence. Noah noticed. "Is everything okay, Grandma?" She tried to smile. "Just grown-up things, sweetheart." He frowned. "We could help. I can work after school." Margaret's heart sank. He was only 10, yet already trying to carry the weight of the world. "No, Noah. Your job is to study and sing. That's how you help me." He looked unconvinced, but nodded anyway. Later that evening, as Mr. Harrison arrived for music practice, he noticed the folded rent notice under a plate. He didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered there for a moment longer than usual. After the lesson, when Margaret walked him to the door, he finally spoke. "You're in trouble, aren't you?" She sighed. "We'll figure it out. We always do." He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. "Take this," he said, handing her an envelope. She opened it and froze. There was money inside. "I can't," she said immediately. "It's not charity," he insisted. "Think of it as a loan. Pay me back whenever life lets you." Margaret's throat tightened. "You don't know how much this means." He smiled. "I think I do." She hugged him, something she hadn't done before. For a long moment, 2 lonely souls stood in silence, both realizing they weren't as alone as they thought. When he left, Margaret held the envelope tightly, and looked up at the ceiling. "Thank you, God," she whispered. "You never forgot us." Viewers, tell me, do you believe that good people still exist in the world, even when everything feels lost? That night, Margaret counted the money carefully. It was enough to pay the rent and buy a little more food. For the first time in months, she slept peacefully, her heart light. But peace never stays long. Sometimes, right when you start believing things will be okay, life reminds you it's not finished testing you yet. Don't miss the next part. When an unexpected visitor from Margaret's past knocks on the door, and the truth she's been avoiding finally comes crashing down, don't miss the next part. When the sound of a single guitar string begins to change the lives of 6 children and their grandmother forever. Sometimes peace feels like the calm before another storm. For Margaret, that calm lasted only a few days, until an unexpected knock on the door brought back memories she thought were buried forever, and how that moment changed everything. Let's start from the beginning. The air that morning was crisp and quiet. The children were at school, and Margaret was sewing a dress order that Mr. Harrison had helped her find. Ava slept soundly in her crib beside the window, and for once the little home felt peaceful. Fragile, but warm. She hummed one of Lila's songs under her breath while stitching the final hem, when suddenly there was a firm knock on the door. At first she thought it was Mr. Harrison. But when she opened it, her smile vanished. Standing there was Emily, her daughter, the same woman who had walked out months ago and left her with 6 children. Her clothes were neat, her hair styled and her perfume faintly familiar. But her eyes looked like someone who'd lost everything. "Mom," Emily said softly. For a long moment, Margaret couldn't speak. Her heart raced, her mind spinning between love and anger. "What are you doing here?" she finally whispered. "I came to see the kids," Emily replied, voice trembling. Margaret stepped aside reluctantly. "They're at school." "Sit down." Emily entered slowly, her gaze moving across the room. The toys, the folded laundry, the patched curtains. "This place, it looks better than before," she said quietly. Margaret crossed her arms. "It looks better because I didn't give up on it." Emily's head lowered in shame. "I made a mistake, Mom." Margaret's eyes hardened. "A mistake is burning dinner, Emily. You abandoned your children." Emily winced. "I know, I was lost. I didn't know how to handle everything after Daniel died. I was drowning." Tears filled her eyes. "But I found a job now. I'm stable. I just want to see them." Margaret's hands trembled, torn between love for her daughter and fear for her grandchildren. "Do they even remember you?" she asked coldly. Emily wiped her face. "They're my children, Mom. Of course they do." Just then, little Ava stirred from her nap. Her tiny voice echoed, "Nana." Emily's eyes filled again. "She's grown so much," she whispered, reaching toward the crib. Margaret instinctively stepped between them. "She doesn't know you, Emily. You left when she was a baby." Emily's tears fell. "Please, Mom, I'm not here to fight. I just want a chance." For a long time, silence filled the room, the kind that hurts more than shouting ever could. Finally, Margaret said softly, "If you really mean it, you'll prove it. You'll come back tomorrow, and the next day, and the next." Emily nodded quickly. "I will. I promise." Margaret's voice shook. "Promises don't mean much in this house anymore." That evening, the children returned home. Margaret didn't mention the visit at first, but Noah noticed something was off. "Grandma, why are you quiet?" She hesitated, then said, "Your mother came by." The room froze. Lila's spoon dropped onto her plate. "Mommy," she whispered, "she wants to see you all tomorrow." For a moment, their faces lit up. Hope, fear, confusion, all mixed together. Noah frowned. "Do you think she'll stay this time?" Margaret looked down. "I don't know, my boy. I truly don't." That night, after the children went to bed, Margaret sat by the window, staring out into the dark street. The house was quiet, but her mind was loud, full of old wounds and unanswered questions. When Mr. Harrison came to check on her, she told him everything. He sighed deeply. Maybe this is her chance to make things right. Or her chance to break them again, Margaret murmured. Viewers, tell me honestly, would you forgive someone who walked away when you needed them most? Mr. Harrison placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Whatever happens, you've already proven one thing. You're the heart of this family. Margaret smiled weakly, tears glistening in her eyes. I just hope that heart doesn't break again. Don't miss the next part, when Emily returns to meet her children. And the reunion doesn't go anything like Margaret hoped. Reunions are supposed to bring joy, but sometimes they reopen wounds you thought had healed. For Margaret, seeing her daughter again wasn't the hard part. The hard part was watching her grandchildren face the woman who had walked away from them, and how that day unfolded. Let's start from the beginning. Before continuing, please subscribe and tell me where you're watching this story from, because what I'm about to tell you is still unbelievable. The next morning felt heavier than usual. Margaret stood by the window, clutching her cup of tea, waiting for Emily to arrive. She had told the children to dress neatly and keep their hearts open, though she wasn't sure she believed that advice herself. When the old clock struck 9, a car pulled up outside. Emily stepped out, holding a small gift bag in one hand and flowers in the other. Her eyes were red, like someone who hadn't slept all night. The children froze as she entered. For a few seconds, silence filled the room, deep, awkward, and thick with memories. Then Charlotte whispered, "Mommy." Emily's face crumbled. "Yes, sweetheart. It's me." She knelt down, opening her arms, and Charlotte ran to her first. Then Lila followed, tears streaming down her cheeks. Even the twins moved closer, uncertain but curious. But Noah stood still, watching quietly from a distance. "Why did you leave us?" he asked finally, his voice trembling. The question hit Emily like a knife. "I was lost, baby," she whispered, "after your father died. I didn't know how to be strong anymore." Noah's eyes filled with tears, but his jaw tightened. "You left Grandma to fix everything. She didn't give up on us. Why did you?" Margaret's heart twisted. She wanted to comfort them both, but this was their moment. Emily reached out, tears streaming down her face. "You're right, Noah. I failed you all. But I'm here now, and I want to make it right." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then little Ava toddled over and climbed into Emily's lap. "Mommy," she said softly, her first time ever saying the word. Emily broke down completely, holding the baby tight. "I'm so sorry," she whispered over and over. Margaret turned away, tears silently falling. Part of her wanted to forgive her daughter, but another part still remembered the hunger, the sleepless nights, and the fear of losing those children to the system. Mr. Harrison arrived later that afternoon, carrying his guitar for the children's lesson. When he saw Emily sitting in the living room, his steps slowed. "Oh," he said gently. "You must be their mother." Emily nodded nervously. "Yes, I'm trying to be again." He smiled kindly. "Then try your best. These little ones are worth every bit of effort." The children gathered around for music time. This time, Emily joined in, quietly at first, then with more confidence. When Lila started singing, Emily's voice cracked, and she reached for her hand. They sang together, mother and daughter, a fragile melody of pain and forgiveness. Margaret sat in the corner, watching them. Maybe, she thought, this was the beginning of healing. But deep down, she knew life wasn't that simple. Later that evening, after the children went to bed, Emily sat across from her mother. "Thank you for not giving up on them," Emily whispered. Margaret looked at her, eyes soft but weary. "I didn't give up because I couldn't," she said. "But don't thank me yet, Emily. Words are easy. Prove it with actions." "I will," Emily promised. "I'll find a better job. I'll help with rent. I'll earn back their trust." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then start tomorrow. As Emily got up to leave, she hesitated by the door. "Mom," she said quietly, "do you still believe I deserve forgiveness?" Margaret looked down at her hands. "Forgiveness isn't given," she said softly. "It's earned. Viewers, what do you think? Would you give someone another chance if their mistake had broken your entire world?" When Emily walked out that night, Margaret whispered a prayer. "Lord, please, guide her back for real this time." But as the moonlight hit the table, Margaret noticed something Emily had left behind. Her purse, and inside, a letter addressed not to Margaret, but to Child Protective Services. Her blood ran cold. Don't miss the next part. When Margaret discovers the shocking reason behind that letter, and her daughter's true intentions finally come to light. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it takes more than words to fix. Margaret wanted to believe her daughter had changed, that this time she had truly come back to rebuild. But what she found inside that forgotten purse would turn her hope into heartbreak all over again. And how that truth unfolded. Let's start from the beginning. The house was quiet that night. Emily had left after promising to visit again in the morning, and the children had gone to bed smiling for the first time in months. But Margaret sat at the kitchen table staring at the small purse her daughter had forgotten. At first, she meant only to keep it safe, but when she noticed the corner of an envelope sticking out, her heart began to pound. Her trembling fingers pulled it free. The words on the front froze her completely. To Child Protective Services. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter. Inside were carefully written words, polite, almost professional, explaining that Emily wanted her children back, that they were currently living in unstable conditions under the care of an elderly guardian, and that she, the biological mother, was ready to resume custody. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Her heart screamed. No, she wouldn't do this again. But the words were there. Clear, deliberate, and signed with her daughter's name. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. All the nights she had spent praying, all the sacrifices, all the love. It felt like it was being taken from her in one cruel stroke. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "Why? Emily, why would you do this to us again?" The next morning, Emily returned. "Mom, I'm here," she said cheerfully, stepping inside. "Did the kids get off to school okay?" Margaret stood by the table, holding the letter in her trembling hands. "They did," she said quietly. "But we need to talk." Emily frowned. "About what?" Margaret lifted the envelope. "About this." Emily froze. Her face turned pale. "Where did you find that?" "In your purse," Margaret replied. "You left it here." The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Emily whispered, "Mom, I was going to tell you." "Tell me what?" Margaret demanded, her voice breaking. "That you were planning to take my grandchildren away?" Emily stepped closer, her own tears spilling. "I just thought, maybe I could get help from CPS to make things easier for all of us." "Easier," Margaret snapped. "You know what those people said to me last time. They gave me 3 months to prove I could care for these children. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Emily shook her head desperately. "Mom, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just thought they could help us. Food, support, something." Margaret turned away, clutching the counter for strength. "Don't you dare lie to me, Emily. You wanted them back. All of them. Because you think your life looks better now." Emily's voice cracked. "I just wanted another chance to be their mother." Margaret's eyes filled again. "Then why didn't you ask me? Why sneak behind my back?" The air grew thick with emotion. Ava began to cry from her crib, sensing the tension. Emily moved to pick her up, but Margaret stopped her with a trembling hand. "Not yet," she said. "You've done enough damage for one lifetime." Emily's tears came faster. "Please, Mom, don't hate me. I only wanted to make things right." Margaret looked at her long and hard. "Making things right starts with honesty, not deception." Emily lowered her head. "I'll fix this," she whispered. "I'll tear the letter up." Margaret's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "You can't erase what you wrote, Emily. You can only prove with time that you meant something better." She turned toward the window, watching sunlight spill across the street. Her heart ached, but a quiet strength filled her. She had survived so much, and she wasn't going to lose her grandchildren now. That evening, when Mr. Harrison came by for music practice, he noticed the tension immediately. Margaret told him everything. He listened in silence, then said gently, "You can't fight her anger with anger. Fight it with truth." She nodded slowly. "Truth and prayer. They're all I have left." He placed a hand over hers. "Then that's more than enough." As the sound of his guitar filled the room once again, Margaret's eyes drifted toward the letter on the table, now torn into pieces. But she knew one thing clearly. Torn paper couldn't mend trust. Don't miss the next part. When Emily's decision brings CPS back to the doorstep, and Margaret must fight to keep her family together one last time. Some battles come quietly. No noise, no warning. Just a letter, a visit, or a voice at your door that can turn your whole world upside down. For Margaret, that moment arrived 2 days after Emily's return, when the sound of a familiar knock sent a chill down her spine. And how she faced it this time. Let's start from the beginning. It was a warm Thursday afternoon. Margaret had just finished folding laundry when she heard the knock. Ava was playing with her blocks on the floor, humming the song Mr. Harrison had taught her. The moment the sound echoed again, 3 slow, deliberate knocks, her hands froze, mid-fold. When she opened the door, her heart sank. Standing outside was Miss Rodriguez, the same Child Protective Services officer who had come months before. Her expression was calm but serious. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Cole," she said. "I'd like to speak with you and Miss Emily Cole, please." Margaret's stomach turned. "She's at work," she replied, her voice tight. "Then I'll speak with you for now," Miss Rodriguez said politely, stepping inside. Margaret motioned toward the sofa. As the officer sat, her eyes scanned the tidy living room, the folded clothes, the toys stacked neatly in baskets, the family photo Noah had drawn taped to the wall. "I've received an updated request from Ms. Emily Cole," she said. "She's filed for custody review." Margaret felt the world tilt under her feet. "She did what?" Miss Rodriguez nodded gently. "She claims she's now financially stable and emotionally ready to take full custody of the children." Margaret's breath caught. "She didn't even talk to me about it. She promised she'd prove herself with honesty, not papers." The officer looked sympathetic but firm. "We just have to verify both living situations before any decision is made. It's standard procedure." Margaret felt her chest tighten, her voice trembling. "I've given everything I have for those children. I sold my wedding ring. I worked until I fainted. Please, don't let her undo all of it." Miss Rodriguez sighed softly. "I know, Mrs. Cole. I've seen how hard you've worked. But the system requires a review when a biological parent files." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Love isn't paperwork. It's what you do when no one's watching." The officer nodded. "You're right. And that's what I'll be watching now." She stood, offering a gentle smile. "We'll be in touch." As she left, Margaret closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her whole body shook, and for the first time in a long while, she couldn't hold back the sobs. Little Ava toddled over, tugging at her skirt. "Grandma, don't cry." Margaret knelt, gathering the little girl into her arms. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. I'm just praying a little louder today." That evening, when the older children returned home, Margaret gathered them all around the table. They sensed something was wrong immediately. "Noah," she began softly, "Child Services came today." He stiffened. "Because of Mom?" Margaret nodded slowly. "She's asking for custody." The room went silent. Charlotte's lower lip trembled. Does that mean we'll have to go? Margaret reached across the table, taking each of their hands. No, not if I can help it. Nobody's taking you away. Noah looked at her, eyes burning with both fear and anger. I'll talk to her. She can't do this again. Margaret shook her head. No, my boy. Let me handle it. We'll do this the right way. Later that night, she sat with Mr. Harrison on the porch, the stars faint above them. He listened quietly as she told him everything. She's my child, Margaret whispered, and yet she's become my enemy. Mr. Harrison sighed. Sometimes love and pain wear the same face. But you can't let this break you. She looked at him, exhausted. What if I lose them? He met her gaze. You won't, because those children aren't just yours in name. They're yours in heart. And hearts always win. Margaret smiled weakly. You sound too sure. I've lived long enough to know, he said gently, that good mothers never lose their children. Not truly. That night, as everyone slept, Margaret stayed awake, staring at the window. She knew what was coming. Paperwork, interviews, court dates, and she was ready to face them all. She whispered into the darkness, God, give me the strength to fight one more time. Don't miss the next part. When Emily's custody battle begins, and Margaret must stand in court to prove love is stronger than bloodlines. Sometimes love is tested not in moments of peace, but in the heat of battle, where every truth you've lived for stands on trial. For Margaret, that trial wasn't just emotional. It became a fight for the very souls she had raised, and how she faced that fight. Let's start from the beginning. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one. The day the official letter arrived, Margaret's hands were already trembling before she opened it. The heading read, Notice of Custody Hearing, Family Court. Her heart sank. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was real. The court date was set for 2 weeks away. She sat down slowly, staring at the paper. The words blurred through her tears. All she could think of was the night she had promised those children that no one would ever take them away. Now, even that promise was in danger. When the children came home from school, she hid the letter for the moment. They needed peace, not panic. That evening, she went to see Mr. Harrison. He was sitting on his porch, tuning his guitar. When he saw her face, his smile faded. What happened? He asked gently. They're taking me to court, she said. Emily's fighting for full custody. He set his guitar aside and reached for her hand. Then we fight back, not with anger, but with truth. You've raised those kids with love the world can see. Margaret looked at him, tears welling up again. But love isn't written on paper. Courts don't see tears and prayers. Maybe not, he said softly. But they see proof. We'll find a way. The next few days passed in a blur of worry. Margaret gathered every document she could. School attendance slips, medical records, even notes from teachers who'd praised the children's progress. Mr. Harrison helped her organize them, while Lila decorated the folders with colorful stickers that said, Family. Grandma, Lila said shyly one night. Are we going to lose? Margaret knelt beside her. We don't lose when we tell the truth, my love. We only lose when we stop trying. But inside, her faith wavered. On the morning of the hearing, the sky was gray, heavy and cold. Margaret dressed carefully, wearing her late husband's silver brooch, the one he gave her on their last anniversary. She whispered to the mirror, Be with me today, John. I need your strength. When they arrived at the courthouse, the children waited with Mr. Harrison in the hallway. Margaret took a deep breath and stepped inside the courtroom. Emily was already there, neatly dressed, looking nervous but determined. Their eyes met, and for a second, Margaret saw the little girl she once raised, the one who used to hide behind her skirt during thunderstorms. But that softness disappeared the moment the judge entered. The proceedings began. Emily's lawyer spoke first, presenting documents about her new job, her apartment, and her income. She is ready, he said, to reclaim her role as a mother. Then it was Margaret's turn. Her lawyer, a kind woman from a community legal service, stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't about who can provide more money. It's about who provided love when it mattered most." Margaret was called to the stand. Her hands trembled as she raised her right hand to take the oath. When asked how she had cared for the children, she spoke slowly, voice steady but full of emotion. "I gave them everything I had, and when that ran out, I gave them faith." The courtroom was silent. Even Emily lowered her gaze. When the judge asked why she fought so hard, Margaret said, "Because I promised them no one would ever make them feel abandoned again. And I don't break promises." Her words hung in the air, simple but powerful. As she stepped down, she caught Emily's eyes again. This time her daughter looked different, softer, regretful. Margaret didn't know what that meant yet, but something in her heart whispered, maybe this battle wasn't about winning or losing anymore. Maybe it was about healing. That evening, after they returned home, Noah hugged her tightly. "Grandma, you were brave," he said. "You didn't even cry." She smiled faintly. "I cried inside, my boy. But sometimes strength means crying where no one can see. Don't miss the next part, when the court delivers its decision, and the outcome surprises everyone, including Margaret herself. Some moments in life last only a few minutes, but those few minutes can decide the rest of your life. For Margaret, that moment came when the judge prepared to speak. The silence in that courtroom felt heavier than any words could, and how that verdict changed everything. Let's start from the beginning. The courtroom felt cold that morning. Margaret sat at the table, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the floor. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every memory of those children in her mind. Their laughter, their hunger, their tears, their little arms wrapped around her when the world had turned its back. Emily sat across from her, looking pale, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. Neither of them spoke. All that remained now was to hear the decision. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, cleared her throat and looked at both of them. "Before I make my ruling," she began, "I want to say something to both of you." She looked at Emily first. "Ms. Cole, it takes courage to admit when you've made mistakes. You've shown willingness to rebuild your life, and that's admirable." Then her gaze turned to Margaret. "And Mrs. Cole, what you've done is beyond words. At 70 years old, you stepped in when no one else did. That is the purest form of motherhood." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. The judge continued, "This court does not take such love lightly. These children are thriving, emotionally and academically, under your care. However, it's also the duty of this court to consider the biological parent's right to reunification, if it serves the children's best interest." The words hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Margaret held her breath. Emily's eyes widened with hope. The judge paused, then said softly, "Therefore, custody will remain with Mrs. Cole. However, Ms. Cole will be granted supervised visitation and the opportunity to rebuild her relationship gradually." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Margaret let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She had won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like mercy. Emily covered her face and began to cry. Margaret looked at her, and something inside her heart shifted. Not anger, not triumph. Just sorrow for a daughter still learning what love really meant. After the hearing ended, Emily approached her mother outside the courtroom. "I'm glad they're safe with you," she whispered. Margaret nodded. "They've always been safe with me, but I hope one day they can be safe with you too." Emily bit her lip, tears still streaming. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Margaret's voice was gentle. "Children forgive faster than adults. Just keep showing up." They stood in silence for a moment. 2 broken women bound by the same love. One who never left, and one who was trying to find her way home. When they returned home, the children ran to Margaret, wrapping their arms around her legs. "Grandma, what happened? Did we win?" She smiled through tears. "We didn't win, my loves. We just got to stay together, and that's better than winning." That night, Margaret sat on the porch with Mr. Harrison, the sunset painting the sky gold. He handed her a cup of tea and said softly, "You did it." She smiled faintly. "I just told the truth. The rest wasn't up to me." He nodded. "And sometimes that's all God asks. Just the truth." Margaret looked at the stars beginning to appear above them. Her heart was full. Not of victory, but of peace. But deep down, she knew the story wasn't finished. The children had stability now, but Emily's path back into their hearts would be long and painful, and Margaret's own body was beginning to show signs of where her spirit couldn't ignore. Love had won this round, but time was another battle waiting, quietly on the horizon. Don't miss the next part, when Margaret faces her most personal struggle yet, and the strength that kept her family together begins to fade. Even the strongest hearts can grow weary. After months of fighting, Margaret finally had peace. But peace doesn't always mean rest. Her body had been whispering warnings she didn't want to hear, and how that silence turned into something deeper. Let's start from the beginning. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one. It had been 3 months since the court's decision. The children were thriving. Their laughter once again filled the small house, echoing through the same walls that had once held only fear and silence. Noah had started helping Mr. Harrison with his garden after school. Lila joined the church choir, singing with a confidence that made everyone stop and listen. Even Emily had begun visiting regularly, keeping her promise to rebuild slowly. Margaret's heart was full, but her body, it seemed, was tired of pretending. At first, it was little things: dizziness, shortness of breath, swelling in her ankles. She brushed it off as fatigue. She had fought through worse. Hunger, grief, exhaustion. Surely this was nothing new. But one evening, as she stirred soup on the stove, her hand slipped and the ladle clattered to the floor. The room tilted, her vision darkened, and she gripped the counter just to stay standing. "Grandma!" Noah's voice was panicked. He ran to her side, catching her before she fell. She tried to smile through the pain. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." But he wasn't convinced. "You need to see a doctor." Margaret shook her head. "Doctors cost money we don't have." "Then I'll find a way," Noah said fiercely. "You've always taken care of us. Now it's our turn." Those words pierced her heart with both pride and sorrow. Her grandchildren were growing up, faster than she ever wanted them to. The next morning, Mr. Harrison showed up early, holding a bouquet of daisies. "You look pale," he said softly. "You should rest." "I don't have time to rest," she replied. "There's breakfast to make, clothes to mend." He gently placed a hand on hers. "Margaret, you've carried this family on your shoulders. It's okay to let someone else carry you for a change." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she finally whispered, "I'm scared." "Of what?" he asked. "Of what happens to them if I can't keep going." He nodded slowly. "That's the thing about love, Margaret. It doesn't die when we do. It multiplies in the hearts we leave behind." She smiled faintly, though tears filled her eyes. "You sound like a preacher." "Just a man who's seen too much life," he said kindly. That afternoon, Emily arrived early for her visit. When she saw her mother's pale face, her smile faded. "Mom, you're not well." "I'm fine," Margaret insisted weakly. "No, you're not," Emily said, voice firm. "I'm taking you to the doctor. No arguments?" For the first time in a long time, Margaret didn't resist. Something inside her told her this time she couldn't. At the clinic, the nurse ran a few tests while Emily held her hand. When the doctor returned with the results, his face was gentle but serious. "Mrs. Cole," he said softly, "your heart is under a lot of strain. You need treatment and rest. No stress, no overwork." Margaret laughed weakly. "Doctor, I'm 70. My whole life has been work." He smiled kindly. "Then maybe it's time to let others love you the way you've loved them." On the drive home, Emily was quiet. She finally said, "Mom, I can take over now. Please, you've done enough." Margaret stared out the window, watching the fading sunset. A mother never feels she's done enough. Her hand trembled slightly, but her heart, though fragile, felt at peace. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of slowing down. She had raised love strong enough to outlive her. That night, as the children slept, she sat on the porch beside Mr. Harrison once again. The moonlight washed over her tired face. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said quietly. He looked at her, smiling sadly. "You've earned your rest, Margaret. Sometimes, letting go isn't weakness. It's the final act of love. Don't miss the next part. When Margaret's health takes a sudden turn, and the family must come together in ways they never have before. When you give everything you have to love, there comes a time when love must give something back." Margaret had spent her life holding others up. But now, her family would have to be the ones to hold her. And how that test of love unfolded. Let's start from the beginning. Take a second to like and subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay with me for more stories like this one. The weeks after Margaret's doctor visit were quiet, almost too quiet. The children seemed to sense that something had changed. They laughed softer, played gentler, and watched her more closely than before. One morning, while she was folding laundry, Lila came up and wrapped her arms around her waist. "Grandma, are you going to get better?" Margaret smiled, stroking the girl's hair. "I already am, my love. Just being here with you makes me stronger." But deep inside, she knew the truth. Her body was slowing down. Her hands trembled more. Her heart grew weaker, and simple tasks felt heavier than before. Emily began taking over household chores. She cooked, cleaned, and drove the children to school. Things she hadn't done in years. Margaret watched her quietly, a mix of pride and sorrow swelling in her chest. One evening, she said softly, "You're doing well, Emily." Her daughter paused, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so," Margaret replied. "You're finally becoming the mother they always needed." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I just wish it hadn't taken losing everything to realize what matters." Margaret smiled faintly. "Sometimes God has to break us before he can rebuild us." Mr. Harrison visited daily, bringing soup, flowers, and songs. His voice, though thin with age, filled the house with a warmth words couldn't create. The children loved to sit by his side as he strummed gentle tunes. One afternoon he looked at Margaret and said, "You've built a miracle here." She chuckled softly. Miracles are just ordinary people refusing to give up. Then she coughed, clutching her chest slightly. He stood immediately. "You should lie down." "I'm fine," she said, the same lie she'd told herself for years. But that night, her body proved otherwise. It happened around midnight. The children were asleep. Emily had just finished cleaning the kitchen when she heard a sound. A soft thud from the living room. She rushed in and found her mother slumped on the couch, one hand pressed over her heart. "Mom," she cried, running to her side. Margaret's face was pale, her breathing shallow. "I'm okay," she whispered, "just tired." Emily held her trembling hand. "No, Mom. We're going to the hospital." The children woke up to the commotion, Noah leading them, fear in his eyes. "Is Grandma okay?" he asked. Emily forced a smile through tears. "She will be. She's strong, remember?" As the ambulance lights flashed outside, Margaret looked around at all the faces she loved most in the world. Noah holding Ava, Lila crying softly, the twins clinging to each other. Her entire life gathered in one small room. "Don't cry," she whispered weakly. "You all made my life beautiful." Her voice cracked, but she smiled. "Whatever happens next, promise me. You'll stay together." They nodded through their tears. At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly. Emily waited in the hallway with the children, hands shaking, praying harder than she had ever prayed before. Hours passed like years. Finally, a doctor stepped out, his face calm but grave. "She's stable for now," he said softly. "But her heart is very weak. She'll need rest. Real rest this time." Emily broke down, holding her children close. For the first time, she understood the weight her mother had carried all those years. When they were allowed to see her, Margaret opened her eyes slowly and whispered, "I'm still here." Noah grinned through tears. "You scared us." She smiled faintly. "Good. Now you'll remember how much you love me." They all laughed, even through the tears. Margaret took Emily's hand. "Promise me something," she said weakly. "Anything," Emily whispered. "Promise me you'll keep them safe and never let them feel alone." "I promise, Mom," Emily said, voice trembling. "I swear it." Margaret closed her eyes, peace settling over her face. "Then I can rest." Love had carried her this far, but the final chapter of that love was just beginning. Don't miss the next part, when Margaret's final message to her family changes how they see life, love, and each other forever. Every story has a last page. For Margaret, hers wasn't about goodbye. It was about everything she had left behind in the hearts that loved her, and how her final act of love changed her family forever. Let's start from the beginning. It had been 2 weeks since Margaret came home from the hospital. The doctors had warned her to rest completely, but she still insisted on sitting by the window each morning, watching the children leave for school. Her body was weaker, her breath shorter, yet her eyes still carried the same warmth, the same fire that had held her family together. Emily moved in permanently to care for her. Every morning she cooked breakfast, helped Margaret with her medicine, and read aloud from the Bible, the same passages her mother used to whisper to her as a child. Some nights Margaret couldn't sleep. She'd look at Emily sitting beside her bed and smile faintly. "You finally learned to stay," she said one night, her voice fragile but kind. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I should have learned sooner." Margaret reached out and held her daughter's hand. "It doesn't matter when, child. What matters is that you came back." One Sunday morning, the house was full of life. Mr. Harrison strummed his guitar while the children sang softly. Margaret sat in her rocking chair, wrapped in a quilt Lila had made from old clothes. Her heart was tired, but her spirit glowed brighter than ever. When the song ended, she whispered, "You've all given me a miracle. My family whole again." Noah came closer, taking her hand. "Grandma, do you promise you'll get better?" She smiled, brushing his hair gently. "Sweetheart, I might not get stronger here, but I'll always be with you, everywhere else." He didn't understand completely, but he nodded, trying to smile. That evening, Margaret asked Emily to bring her a small wooden box from her bedside drawer. Inside were letters, one for each child and one for Emily. She placed the box in her daughter's lap. "When the time comes, give these to them. They'll know what I wanted to say." Emily shook her head, tears falling freely. "Don't talk like that, Mom." Margaret smiled softly. "I'm not talking about dying. I'm talking about finishing." A few nights later, as the moonlight poured through the curtains, Margaret sat awake in silence. The world was peaceful, the kind of peace she had prayed for her entire life. She looked around her room. Pictures of the children, the worn Bible on the nightstand, the old guitar leaning against the wall. She whispered a final prayer. "Thank you, God, for letting me see them safe, happy, and loved." When morning came, Emily walked in to wake her mother. The sunlight touched Margaret's face. Calm, serene, smiling faintly, she was gone. Emily fell to her knees, clutching her mother's hands, whispering through tears, "You kept your promise. Mom, you never gave up." The children gathered around, crying softly but holding each other the way Margaret had taught them to. As one, Mr. Harrison stood in the doorway, head bowed, whispering a hymn through tears. A week later, the family held a small memorial service under the oak tree in the front yard. Lila sang the same song her grandmother used to hum while sewing, and Noah read from the letter she'd left him. "Don't be sad for me," it said. "I'm not far away. Every time you choose kindness, I'll be there. Every time you forgive, I'll smile. Every time you love, you'll feel me near." There wasn't a dry eye that day. Emily stood by the old rocking chair and whispered, "I'll keep your promise, Mom. I'll never let them feel alone." A gentle wind blew through the yard, rustling the leaves, almost like a whisper of approval. Margaret Cole's story wasn't one of tragedy. It was the story of love that refused to surrender. A love that outlived her heartbeat and became the strength of everyone she touched. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is love until our last breath, and trust that love will keep living when we're gone. Thank you for watching till the end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in the power of love and family. And also add, where are you watching from? Maybe each of us has been at the same point, when kindness is tested, when lines blue, when love and self-respect force us to choose. If this story touched you, leave a comment and tell me what you think. Or if you have been through something similar, every share, every like, every time you hit subscribe does not help me to continue this journey. It helps the stories of grandparents who learn to say no a little farther. Thank you for walking the whole way with me, so that today, in a home full of sunsets and roses, I can smile and say, at this age, I'm still here, still free, and at last, still at peace.